By the mid-1930s, the German army standardized its edged weaponry with the S-84 98-3, a bayonet designed specifically for the Karabiner 98K rifle, which became the Wehrmacht's standard-issue firearm throughout World War II. Unlike earlier longsword-style bayonets, this model was compact and practical, reflecting the modern battlefield's need for mobility over ceremonial flourish. Measuring around 10 inches in blade length with an overall size of 15 inches, it featured a single-edged spear-point blade, robust steel crossguard, and ribbed wooden grips riveted to the tang for durability. The steel scabbard was usually blued, designed to withstand the rigors of frontline service, and carried in a leather frog on the soldier's belt. Manufacturing was widespread, with major Solingen firms like Eichhorn, WKC, and Puma, alongside wartime plants such as Dott, Brno, producing millions between 1935 and 1945. Variations included polished early war finishes, parkerized late war coatings, and differences in grip material as shortages intensified. Accessories often included decorative portapies for NCOs and officers, though most soldiers carried plain combat versions. Identification relied on SXXX manufacturer codes, WAA inspection eagles, and date stamps etched on the ricasso or pommel. The S-84 98-3 became the most common German bayonet of the Nazi era, with countless battlefield photographs showing it fixed to the muzzle of the K98K. Its ubiquity, durability, and simplicity made it the blade of the German soldier, a symbol of both practicality and mass production. Today, it remains one of the most collected relics of World War II German militaria. By the outbreak of World War II, many German soldiers still carried the older Sieitengewehr 9805, often nicknamed the butcher bayonet for its cleaver-like profile. Originally introduced during World War I for the Gewehr 98 rifle, it was retained in the 1930s for second-line troops, training units, and occasional ceremonial purposes, even as the shorter S-84 98-3 became the standard for the K98K. Measuring nearly 20 inches overall, with a blade length around 14.5 inches, the 9805 gave soldiers a reach advantage in trench fighting, though by World War II it was considered bulky for modern combat. The blade was single-edged with a fullered design, broad and heavy compared to later models. Wooden grip panels were secured by rivets, and the hilt featured a distinctive high muzzle ring and steel crossguard. Scabbards were typically steel with leather belt frogs, though many World War I-era leather scabbards were still in circulation. Manufacturing came from major Zollingen makers such as Eichhorn, WKC, and F. Herder, often with maker marks and Imperial or Weimar acceptance stamps, later joined by Nazi-era Waffenamt eagles on refurbished examples. Variations included plain combat models, sawback versions, many later ground down due to Allied protests in World War I, and reissued pieces shortened to resemble the S-84 98. Accessories included parade frogs and portapies for honor guard use. Markings like maker stamps, unit numbers, or Waffenamt proofs help date each piece. Though outdated by 1939, the Sieitengewehr 9805 remained a visible link to Germany's World War I heritage, carried by reservists, engineers, and ceremonial guards, a relic of older battlefield traditions surviving into Hitler's war. While the battlefield demanded practicality, the Nazi regime also placed enormous emphasis on spectacle and uniformity, which gave rise to the K98K parade, or dress bayonet. Unlike the rugged S-84 98-3 meant for combat, these bayonets were produced for officers, NCOs, and ceremonial purposes during the 1930s and 1940s. They were designed to complement the sharp appearance of the dress uniform, with highly polished or nickel-plated finishes that gleamed on parade grounds and at official functions. Typically larger than combat bayonets, these pieces often had extended blades, sometimes exceeding 10 inches, with ornate hilts featuring bright nickel crossguards, polished pommels, and ribbed black bakelite grips instead of wood. Scabbards were equally decorative, usually lacquered black with polished fittings, and carried in quality leather frogs. Solingen makers such as Eichhorn, Puma, and WKC were leading producers, stamping their logos prominently onto the ricasso, which today aids collectors in authentication. Variations ranged from short and long blade patterns to presentation-grade pieces featuring etched designs, unit dedications, or regimental motifs. Accessories like decorative portapes and deluxe frogs further distinguished higher ranks or ceremonial use. Markings included factory logos, etched slogans, and sometimes Waffenamt proofs on pieces intended for semi-official issues. Though they never saw combat, these dress bayonets symbolized prestige, authority, and the militarized pageantry of the Nazi state. To German officers, they represented not just a blade, but a badge of honor, reinforcing the regime's obsession with appearance and discipline. Today, they remain among the most visually striking and collectible bayonets of the era. Among the most distinctive bayonets carried into the Nazi era were the sawback variants of the 98 series, originally designed during World War I. These blades, cut with a row of sharp saw teeth along the spine, were intended for dual use, both as combat bayonets and as field tools for engineers and pioneers. By the late 1930s, they were largely obsolete, but limited numbers remained in Wehrmacht inventories, issued occasionally to specialist units or reissued during shortages in the early war years. The sawback design was usually applied to the Sieitengewehr 98 and 9805 models, giving them an intimidating appearance. Blades measured up to 14 to 15 inches, with deep fullers and robust spines, making them significantly heavier than the later S84 98-3. Wooden grip scales riveted to the tang and steel crossguards with large muzzle rings completed the rugged look. Scabbards were either leather with metal fittings or all steel, depending on the production period. Manufacturing came primarily from Zollingen firms such as Eichhorn, WKC, and VC Schilling, and most surviving examples carry imperial acceptance marks. Some were later refurbished with Nazi-era Waffenamt stamps, reflecting their continued though limited use. Variations included full sawback versions, ground-down examples after the saw edge was banned in World War I due to Allied protests, and shortened reworks to approximate the S84-98 pattern. Accessories were standard leather frogs, though few parade fittings exist since these were viewed as functional tools rather than symbols of prestige. Today, sawback bayonets are rare collectibles, valued for their unique design and direct link between Germany's World War I legacy and its rearmament under Hitler. When Germany occupied countries like Czechoslovakia, Poland, Belgium, and Austria, it not only seized their rifles but also pressed their bayonets into service. The most prominent example was the Czech VZ-24 bayonet, originally paired with the VZ-24 Mauser rifle. After 1939, these were adapted for the German K98K, with many receiving new scabbards, frogs, and Waffenamt inspection stamps. For the Wehrmacht, this was a practical way to arm vast numbers of troops without straining domestic production. The VZ-24 bayonet closely resembled the German S84-98-3 in size and function, with a 9 3/4 to 10-inch blade, single-edge spear point, and wooden grips. However, Czech craftsmanship gave it a distinctive fuller design and different hilt profile. Other reissued models included the Austrian M95 bayonets, Polish WZ-29 bayonets, and even Belgian Mauser types, each slightly modified to fit the K98K's bayonet lug. Scabbards varied from blued steel to reworked leather fittings, often mismatched due to wartime necessity. Markings provide the clearest evidence of reissue. Original Czech arsenal stamps like Chi Z or E in a lion crest were frequently left intact, later joined by German acceptance marks. Many bayonets were reblued, refinished, or shortened to meet Wehrmacht standards. Accessories were generally plain leather frogs, though some Czech-manufactured frogs also saw German use. These captured bayonets demonstrate how the Reich relied not only on German factories, but also on the arsenals of conquered nations. For historians and collectors, they embody the logistical reality of a war fought across Europe, where weapons from multiple origins ended up side by side on the belts of Nazi soldiers. The M1884-98 third pattern bayonet, the standard for the Carabiner 98K, was not produced by a single factory but by a vast network of Solingen cutlery firms and wartime contractors. Between 1934 and 1945, dozens of manufacturers contributed, each leaving subtle differences in finish, construction, and markings that today are essential for collectors. Early pieces carried full trade names like E&F Horster, Karl Eichhorn, WKC, and Puma. but by 1935 to 36, these shifted to the SXXX coding system, later evolving into letter codes such as BYF, Mauser Oberndorf, ASW, E&F Horster, and COF, Karl Eichhorn. Despite strict regulations, variations emerged. Some pommels had more squared edges, while others were rounded. Finishes ranged from polished bluing on early examples to rougher phosphate or painted coatings in late war production. Grips also varied. Early finely machined wooden slabs gave way to coarser grips as materials and labor quality declined. Certain late war issues even featured synthetic grips when wood supplies dwindled. Scabbards reflected the same evolution. Early scabbards were deeply blued steel, later transitioning to more utilitarian painted or parkerized finishes. Matching bayonet and scabbard serials were the norm early in the war, but by 1944 to 45, mismatched numbers were increasingly common due to battlefield reissues and shortages. For identification, the maker's code, date, and Waffenamt inspection stamps are the most reliable indicators. Collectors prize rare makers, transitional finishes, and pristine examples, as they reveal both the industrial diversity of the Third Reich and the strain of total war on German production. Among the most striking edged weapons of the Nazi era were the special parade and presentation bayonets produced between 1936 and 1939 by Solingen's top manufacturers. Unlike the standard issue S8498-3, these were never meant for combat, but for prestige, display, and ceremonial use. Officers, NCOs, and even political or civil leaders purchased them privately, often as part of full-dress uniforms. Designs varied widely. Many bore nickel-plated blades with some etched and ornate motifs, oak leaves, swastikas, unit dedications, or Waffen-SS runes, while higher-end examples included gilded hilts, silver fittings, and staghorn grips. A popular form was the long extra bayonet with an extended blade far longer than practical for service use, clearly intended as a status symbol. Makers like Karl Eichhorn, E&F Horster, and WKC specialized in these decorative pieces, often selling them in fitted presentation cases lined with velvet or satin. Accessories elevated their prestige further. Portapies, sword knots woven in branch colors, custom scabbards with plated or blackened finishes, and personalized engravings that commemorated service milestones or gifts from superiors. Some were even produced as commemorative runs for unit anniversaries, Luftwaffe squadrons, or SS formations, making them highly collectible today. Markings differed from combat bayonets. Many bore the full trade name and logo of the manufacturer rather than the later anonymous wartime codes, reinforcing their status as display pieces. While never mass-issued, these bayonets embodied the fusion of militarism and pageantry in the Third Reich, where edged weapons were as much about symbol and spectacle as utility. As Germany expanded across Europe, the Wehrmacht inherited vast stocks of foreign rifles, and with them, their bayonets. Rather than discard these weapons, the Third Reich pragmatically kept original bayonets paired with captured rifles, a practice that became common from 1939 through 1945. These foreign pattern bayonets were especially visible in second line, occupation, and auxiliary units, though they occasionally surfaced at the front. From Austria came the Steyr M95 bayonet, a straight, cruciform spike fitted to the straight-pull Mannlicher rifle. In Czechoslovakia, large stocks of the VZ-24 bayonet accompanied captured rifles, many reissued directly to Wehrmacht formations. French stocks added models like the MAS-36 bayonet, a compact cruciform spike that slid neatly into its rifle housing. Even Belgian FN 1889 and 1916 bayonets appeared, as occupation troops armed themselves with whatever was available. These bayonets were seldom modified, though some received German depot stamps or reworked scabbards to fit Wehrmacht frog standards. Accessories varied, with German frogs often added for compatibility. Markings remained mixed. Original manufacturer stamps, serials, and crests typically stayed intact, creating a patchwork of identifiers that today make these bayonets a fascinating field of study. While never glamorous, These bayonets highlight Germany's wartime reliance on practicality over prestige, blending foreign arms into its logistical system. They also demonstrate the scope of Axis control, as rifles and bayonets from nearly every occupied country found their way into German service. Training and short bayonets were practical responses to needs away from the front line. Garrison troops, police units, and training schools required lighter, safer, and easier-to-handle blades than the full-length combat patterns. Standard issue for these roles included shortened K98K training blades, often called Kurs or shortened K98K types, police short-pattern bayonets issued to Ordnungspolizei units, and blunt, wooden or metal drill bayonets used at Heer and Waffen-SS marksmanship and drill schools. Design emphasized economy and safety. Blades typically ranged from 6 to 9 inches, were single-edged or cruciform, and many training examples were intentionally blunted or fitted with rounded tips. Grips could be plain wood, stamped steel, or even drilled for weight reduction. Manufacturing followed established makers when available, Solingen firms like Eichhorn and WKC, but increasingly shifted to wartime contractors and depot workshops that reworked full-size blades into shortened variants or produced simple, stamped replacements. Variations included parade short bayonets with decorative scabbards, utilitarian Parkerized short models for police, and wooden drill variants with simple leather or tin sheaths. Accessories were minimal: leather frogs, shortened scabbards, and basic retention clips suited to garrison belts. Markings remain critical for identification. Maker names or SXXX codes, Waffenamt acceptance stamps, and depot refurbishment marks often tell whether a piece began life as a combat bayonet or a purpose-made training variant. Though less glamorous than frontline blades, these short bayonets played an essential role in daily military and police routines, offering a compact, economical solution where full-length bayonets were unnecessary or impractical. By the last desperate years of the Third Reich, German bayonets reflected not ceremony or prestige, but sheer survival. The standard issue remained the trusty S84 98-3 for the K98K rifle, alongside older Sieitengewehr 9805 butcher bayonets and even nickel-plated parade bayonets pressed into combat. But with Allied bombings crippling industry and resources dwindling, factories produced experimental short runs such as the K98K Kurs trial bayonet, and simplified stamped steel versions of the S84-98. These models looked crude compared to pre-war pieces, squared-off pommels, rough sheet metal grips, and scabbards that were little more than unfinished steel tubes. Manufacturing shifted from the precision of Solingen firms like Eichhorn and WKC to wartime plants such as Brno, where output was rushed and finish quality suffered. Variations included Parkerized versus blued coatings, shortened field conversions, and hybrid assemblies built from leftover stock. Accessories underscored the divide. Ornate portapies, polished scabbards, and dress frogs contrasted sharply with plain leather fittings and utilitarian sheaths issued to common soldiers. Markings are the key for collectors today. S/XXX factory codes, WAA acceptance eagles, and date stamps like 44 dot identify true late war pieces. Though never produced in the numbers of the S84-98-3, these rare bayonets capture the decline of German arms. Blades once meant to project power and prestige reduced to bare, functional tools of a regime in collapse. For historians, they serve as tangible proof of how desperation reshaped even the smallest details of Nazi weaponry. From frontline steel to ceremonial prestige, these bayonets tell the hidden story of Nazi Germany's edge in war. Subscribe, like, and drop a comment on which bayonet stood out to you the most.